So the three panelists we have today are Mark Dawson. Dr. Mark Dawson is a senior research software engineer with Supercomputing Wales and co-leader of the RSE team at SA2C. Secondly, we have Professor Biagio Lucini, who is the director, as we've already ascertained, of SA2C, and is also the Swansea principal investigator of Supercomputing Wales. And finally, on the right, we have Ian Morris, who is principal systems officer for Swansea Academy of Advanced Computing and of Supercomputing Wales. Thank you. So, if I take a seat here, so we'll start off. I'll ask one or two questions, and then we'll open things out to the rest of the room for any questions that you might have. So, first question I have. So we talked earlier about how you saw the future of SA2C. How do we see the future of the Supercomputing Wales project?
Well, I'll start by taking this. A supercomputing project is unlikely to get further funding by WEFO. On the other hand, it's certainly a resource that is very valuable and very valued by the Welsh government at various levels. It's also doing very well in establishing a research center in HPC in Wales in collaboration, mostly with Atos and also with Dell. So it's quite likely to continue in the future. Now, in which form and shapes will need to be agreed. Okay, I mean, there are other initiatives that are building on Supercomputing Wales. For instance, I mentioned before the application to UKRI for a center for doctoral training in artificial intelligence. If that gets funded, it will be a commitment over a period of 9 years, starting from 2019. So which means that it's unlikely that the project will stop anytime soon after 2020. Yeah. But again, it's well, I mean, I carry somewhat the responsibility of keep the project going, but at the same time, it's up to the community to come up with ways that help the project to sustain itself. In this respect, I would like also to add, going back to what you had said about attributing to the project. Okay, so we are funded by WEFO, and whoever is familiar with the WEFO way of funding knows that WEFO gives you money expecting something in return. What it expects in return for us are research grants, papers, and enterprise helped. So if anybody, and that's the reason why we have that form, we need only to capture what we do. Nobody will come and subtract money from your research grants. But we need to show that what we are doing in Supercomputing Wales is actually progressing the research in Wales. So when you fill that form, please go through it carefully and see whether you can help the project by inputting a few papers, by inputting a few grants you are particularly responsible for. And all this will be part of our return to WEFO. That's the only commitment that we ask you on your side. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Biagio. Anyone else have anything to add?
I'd be interested looking for the future, whether there's any grants out there to sort of bolster the system in terms of the hardware that's there. We've had early discussions with some people. They just want to buy an extra GPU node or something like that they want dedicated access to, but they don't want to administer it themselves. So it'd be interesting to see if anything of that nature comes up.
Yeah, I think taking a slightly different angle on the whole thing. The Supercomputing Wales grant is great, and it's allowed us to do some really good work. And I think, for me, the important thing is that the work is there and the work needs to be done. I think people need to do HPC research, and there needs to be some level of support for that. And I'd like to think that will in some form continue into the future. Now, how funding happens or where that comes from are open questions, but to my mind there is work to be done, and the work needs to happen. And whether, even if we are just the catalyst that allows this to continue in some shape or form, I think that's a really great thing that's happened.
Thanks, Mark. Did anyone in the room want to add comments to that? Anyone got any feedback on that?
I wanted to ask how this fits into the kind of national, the UK scale of HPC centres. So obviously you've got HPC centre in Edinburgh with Archer and Archer 2, and you've got Hartree and Daresbury, which offer different things, targeting different things. Is this kind of like a springboard for locally for us to develop things in order to gain access into those bigger platforms, or is it going off in a different direction? How does it fit in on that scale?
Okay, so I can start by answering. So we have inherited from HPC Wales the status of EPSRC Tier 2 systems. So for those who are not familiar, the HPC landscape in Europe is organized as a Tier 0. But I don't know what will happen after Brexit. This is a big question mark for everything, including HPC. So Tier 0 is essentially a EU-supported resource that is across Europe, is made of distributed centers, that's PRACE, and everybody can apply with flagship projects that require millions and millions of CPU time. There are open calls and everybody can apply. Then there are the Tier 1, countrywide, which is in the UK is Archer in the EPSRC scheme. And there are the Tier 2, which are the local centers like us. To be recognized as a Tier 2 EPSRC center is already an achievement. That also means, by the way, that when you prepare a grant application, you can ask EPSRC money and other council, not only EPSRC, you can ask money to run on a Tier 2 system, and you can indicate which Tier 2 system you want to run on. So if you indicate, I think it's still HPC Wales in the system, then I mean part of that grant will support our activity locally. Yeah. Concerning, there are other initiatives in the UK. So there is ATI, that is a center for artificial intelligence, and machine learning, but is not. It doesn't have its own dedicated research resource, as far as I'm concerned. There is DIRAC, which is a facility, again distributed, that serves the particle physics and astronomy community. And there is Hartree, that is again STFC, but has more engagement with industry. Yeah. In this landscape, we characterize ourselves for, first of all, being regional, and that gained us the title of Tier 2 Center, and then for providing research software engineer support. I think that, well, now I don't know, I don't have the ranking, but we have certainly across Supercomputing Wales, if not the first, maybe the second research software engineer base across the supercomputing facilities. For instance, to give you some terms of comparison, ATI has order 6, DIRAC has 3, and is now trying to bid to get to 5. Edinburgh is, EPCC in Edinburgh is a completely different type of cattle because they have had research software engineers, although they were calling them differently for 30 years. So they have now order 30, but it's not clear how many of them are classified as pure HPC or not. So we are either the first or the second in terms of numbers of research software engineers in the UK for sure, probably also wider than that. And I'm also happy to say that one of the characteristics of the Supercomputing Wales with respect to its predecessor was to emphasize more the research software engineering role over the role of the hardware. Okay? This now is more widely recognized, as it's quite widely recognized that we have been leading this trend of employing research software engineers in HPC. So does it answer your question? It was too wide spectrum, and I didn't really clarify the point you were after.
Yeah, no, I think that.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
On the question earlier, Sunbird is going to have 126 nodes, but only 4 are populated with GPUs. Why so few NVIDIA cards in the system?
I think historically that came from when HPC Wales went in. We put 16 GPU nodes in, and over the 5 years of running, of that, they were hardly ever used. So at the time of trying to come up with a spec, it was obvious that we needed to do something with GPUs. We weren't quite sure what the uptake of it would be. I think probably over the last 6-9 months, probably too late from when that spec goes on, it's pretty obvious that it's going to be the next big thing. And it's going to be a real challenge to try and get everybody using those. It might be, we need to look at ways of improving that, put some more in, I'd have thought.
Yeah, one possibility, I don't know how much we can do within the project with the budget constraint that we have at the moment, because we have essentially spent all the hardware money for various reasons. One possibility is that for the groups that have the possibility to procure GPUs, or indeed any other type of machine, we can look after the hardware, guaranteeing you access on an exclusive or semi-exclusive, but we can agree on the terms and conditions.
Is there a target to raise to add more GPUs that we can contribute towards?
We don't have a target as such.
And I guess the question is, we went for the V100s, Cardiff went for the P100s, and there's big difference in cost of a node. So it's really what do people need. We've had people come and say we need GPUs, but they don't seem to, they don't have a specification of what they need as a GPU node. So again, I think this is going to be a learning curve for what we spec.
Yeah, this came information that at the moment we have not publicized enough. So we have a framework agreement with Atos and Dell, who are our hardware providers, so the system can be increased. Okay. We don't have a Mac, can be increased. So if there are people who want to contribute node to the cluster, retaining access to those nodes on an exclusive, semi-exclusive, whatever basis, that can be done with homogeneous hardware. So the gain with that will be system that we are familiar, will be a system, an hardware solution that we are very familiar with and we can easily support.
Yeah, I think one last thing that might be worth adding is that you're not the only person who's asking this question. So we've had conversations with other groups who are also interested in more GPU. So I think that's, if nothing else, that's an encouraging thing, in that, as you say, some sort of pooling of resources could enable us to then provide further, seeing as that you wouldn't then be the only person interested in this.
Yeah, because I had hoped there was going to be a lot more GPUs on the system, and a little disappointed there's only 8. But if there's a plan to increase the availability, there needs to be funding towards that. Is there a forum that can be discussed?
In the first instance, this will be the forum, and then we can take offline. For instance, we can organize a working group with all the people that have the same need. We can sit around the table and we can work out a solution that, bringing together small pots of money, perhaps can help us to build something that is substantial.
From a technical point, that's something I didn't mention earlier, was we've built future expansion capability into Sunbird as it is, so adding GPU nodes would necessarily incur the expense of all the interconnect and stuff you normally have to procure or buy with it. So it can be done in quite a cost-effective way if there is money to kind of pull together to achieve that.
It might be worth noting, NVIDIA have got a scheme, it's really worth just doing a Google search. They've got a scheme where, as an academic, you can apply to get free GPU hardware. I think it's something like, and people have got it, right? So like, know people at the universities, they've got hardware turned up in the mail for free. So you can apply for, I think, one of the Tesla cards. It's worth having a look and depending on what you need. So maybe that's a good way. Like a lot of people apply for free stuff and they get it. So that's maybe a good roundabout way of getting hardware.
So if we find out which compatible cards will drop into the system,
Maybe,
it'd
yeah,
be
it'd be worth looking up.
Back.
2 questions. So one other back, one looking forward. The HPC Wales system, and then just have a feel for how well utilised it was and what percentage capacity that typically ran at. And a more out there question: as an institution that does HPC research, how long do you think we're going to be relying on buying our own physical kit? And will there be a point
I can give you the historic. I mean, HPC Wales, by the end of it, was running at 89% capacity. It was pretty much chock-a-block. People were complaining about how long they'd have to wait for it, so it was full. My personal feeling about cloud, I think it's got its place. It's got its place now. It might be 5 to 10 years away. It might be more thing, but at the moment, I think it's got a place for bursting. It's got a place where you need something quickly, and you can't wait to queue, or the specification of the hardware isn't there. But if you look at just the cost dynamic of it, as I said, the system, this new one goes live, I'd expect it to be at capacity from week 1, week 2. If you were to do 5,000 cores in the cloud of a comparable, the cost is going to be 10 times the cost of the hardware at the moment.
Yeah.
So I think the question, you're asking at what point the cloud is going to become relevant, and I think there isn't a defined point, because depending on what you're doing, that point will be different. For some people, you can run really effectively in the cloud right now. And for other people, the dedicated hardware will give you those performance, will give better performance. Currently, that may not be the case for long.
You think a point will come for everyone at some point?
It may come. It depends also on costing, because I mean this is a question that we have asked ourselves before stipulating any contract with these vendors. Already at the planning stage, can we use the cloud right now? And we need a market investigation, and assuming 100% of utilization with machine, including all the other costs like electricity, which is a substantial factor in it, we come up with an estimate that if you're optimistic means that the cloud will cost you 8 times more. So to Swansea University might have cost 8 times more. That might not be the same to say that to each single research group may cost 8 times more. I mean, if you need to burst, as Ian was saying before, if you have a problem that, for one day require, 5,000 cores, and therefore 3 months doesn't require anything, because you have to think about interpreting those data, then the cloud is probably already the most effective solution for you, the cheapest.
Yeah. I think that's possibly going forward, depending obviously on availability, funding, etc., etc. But that's a pretty good model, I think, for the way that HPC could potentially work, if we find that we get this this variation over time of the usage, that we can then use that.
And actually that brings also another point, and going back to the question before about the GPUs. So in the context, there are mechanisms through which, through our partnership agreement, we just didn't make just a contract to buy the hardware from Atos and Dell. We have a partnership agreement. They have provided us with extra resources in the cloud that we could be using. At the moment, we have been too busy setting up the current hardware, so we couldn't look into the details. But they include other type of hardware, and they include certainly GPUs. So at some point, there might be good news also from that front, as soon as we are able to declare this system working and move on with the rest of the project.
The other thing to add to cloud is my worry is data transfer. As everybody says, big data, what is big data, how much is that, what's the cost overhead of getting that in, getting it out, will that be a factor? That's always sitting there in the background as well. I mean, having this system sitting on the campus network, it connects in at 10 gig, so if you've got local data here, it's pretty quick to get it in and out of the system at the moment. Probably not the same as true of the cloud.
Okay. What do you see are the big challenges in research computing?
From my point of view, I think this morning I've gone over what I think are the big challenges in research computing. Clearly, personally, that is the area that I deal with, so that's the thing that I'm the most interested in. I think really the way that things are done in industry is significantly ahead of the way that we do things in academia, and I think we don't really know how much we suffer. And the changes and the investment into that, I think, is what we really need going forward, and what could really make that difference in us going from battling against the software that we're using and battling against the technology that we're using, to using it really effectively and doing things quickly and efficiently.
Yeah, I think it's sustainability, in my opinion. That goes back also to what Mark was saying. I mean, as an academic over the year, and I think that most of us in this room have experienced that, I mean, you have an interesting idea, you cannot do that because you have also other things to do. So you think about a PhD project. Then a student comes along, very smart student, he produces research code that works and enable you to step forward. Then the time arrives in which the student writes up, and the knowledge, the inside knowledge about the code lives with the student. So despite the fact that the code is there and potentially working, it takes another PhD to make it work again at the standard it was before. And the story just keeps repeating itself over and over again. So we are having a mechanism for sustainable coding development, in my opinion, is one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah. And just to sort of reiterate on that, going back to the way that things are done outside of university, this isn't a problem that's exclusive to us. People in industry come and leave, they leave companies, they arrive, and software lives longer than the individuals. And that's on some level because the companies strategize, make decisions, and implement technologies that allow that to happen. I admit probably in academia it's happening a little bit quicker, but to my mind that means that addressing the problem is more critical rather than less critical.
Ian, do you have any perspective?
No, I think that's more these guys' areas than mine, I would say. So,
Well, from a sysadmin's point of view.
I don't know if it's an issue for you. There's always been this thing about commercial software versus open source. We have commercial packages on there. They're always expensive, even with academic licenses. There's often an open source package could do what the commercial is doing, but it needs re-education of the user, which I guess is where you guys come in. I'm thinking things like MATLAB, when you can use as well, even CFD, ANSYS versus OpenFOAM, that sort of thing. Maybe that's a way forward.
Thanks.
Just to follow on with the open source technology, last year it's an attention on the Intel versus GNU. And Intel was around the same code twice as quickly as Ireland. And technically that efficiency is saving power and CPU time by compiling on the more efficient compiler. I know it's
Yeah.
but has anybody actually done any cost analysis using the open source compilers versus the proprietary compilers to see if there is a power saving, CPU saving, cost wise?
Not that I'm aware of on the different compilers, unless you guys.
Not systematically. I mean, some time ago I had a direct interest in that, and I did it. It turns out that the Intel compiler, which is using more open source technology that one may think of, in fact has an edge, and the edge comes from the insider knowledge that Intel has about their processors, and they don't tell you. Okay? This is true for almost for every architecture. So open source compilers are very good for software portability. Commercial compilers are very good on the machines on which they have been thought of. The gap is in the region of 10-15%, depends a little bit on the code at the moment. It is, I mean, sometimes it's closing, sometimes it opens again. So it's a little bit of an hit and miss. In terms of supercomputing, what also matters are the libraries and the communication libraries. In Supercomputing Wales, we tend to use the Intel. So we are aware of that, and the Intel software development tools are one of the first packages on which we have invested. We tend to use the Intel MPI library, which is what supports most of our communication, and this performs better than the open source equivalent. That is also not a bad performer in the field. So essentially, I mean, open source guarantees you almost out-of-the-box portability, okay, and it guarantees you an acceptable to good performance. Commercial compilers guarantee you performance that is, most of the cases, is better for the architectures in which they have been devised, and a certain level of portability. I don't know if that answers your question.
I was just curious, you're saying 10 to 15%.
Yeah, that was based on my own benchmarks on my own code. That depends on the code. So I mean, sometimes could be larger than that, sometimes could be unnoticeable.
And I think the point about open source is quite interesting because, as you've quite rightly alluded to, it's not always the answer. And I think the thing we really need to be looking at is picking the best tools for the job. And sometimes those best tools might be commercial, but there are cases, I think, where the commercial tools are picked because that's what I'm used to, where there are actually better open source tools that are available to do similar jobs, or do the same thing, in some cases better. I know that, for example, MATLAB was one of the things that's brought up. MATLAB's used very, very frequently in engineering, and sometimes it's not the only option. It just happens to be the option that people happen to have known about. So I think some degree of educating in the available options, in making people aware of what's available, making people aware of the alternatives, and really trying to be selective about the tools that we use for given jobs, rather than just picking the ones that we've always used. It could be a useful move.
Okay, moving on. So Supercomputing Wales has a lot of resources available. What do you see are the biggest untapped resources that people don't realise is that they aren't making use of?
These guys, you guys. It's easy. I think it's easy to say what the hardware is there. Everybody can see. But the untapped, I think, is the education of what the RSCs can do.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'll say that the RSCs can do a lot for the community, can help in the preparation of grant applications. Some of us are already essentially tapping on their expertise for that. If you are doing applications for the Tier 1 and Tier 0 research centers, they require you to provide quite advanced scalability and performance studies, which are A, time consuming, and B, require specialistic insights on what you are doing that some of us may not have. The research software engineers can provide that. Likewise, if you're writing a grant application and you need to support it by talking about the performances of your code, why your code is optimal and why you're able to deliver on the ground of that, research software engineer can provide you with more quantitative arguments that you can put in the grant application itself. Research software engineers can run training, and this is something that we have done to a certain extent, but we certainly could do more of that depending on demand and interest. And research software engineer can certainly help you to choose the right tool for the job. Yeah. So if you are undecided in between two softwares, if you are undecided in between two compilers, if you are undecided between open source and commercial solution, this is an evaluation that we can do together.
Maybe a suggestion would be that you provide a kind of template which so if you want to do a grant application which requires detailed scaling analysis, then obviously you have to engage with you quite a lot. But if you want to have a relatively light touch HPC part in your grant, that you provide a template that says these services will be used,
We have some text. I don't know if it's available online.
And in the same way for acknowledgements in the papers.
Yeah, sure. We have all those texts, but maybe there's a case for making it more visible or more available, more readily available. It could be something that maybe we can put into the portal, into the My Supercomputing Wales portal.
The attribution text I think is there, but I think some text about Sunderland in there would be good.
I have a question. So, Biagio, you mentioned as the future possibly a research institute. So what do you mean by that?
Well, it's essentially an umbrella institute in which we run our own seminar series that is both from the research point of view and from the supercomputing point of view. We share expertise on how to optimize numerical methods across the board, gives you this sense of feeling and belonging, and it helps you to create an identity and to be more visible outside.
So how would it be different from SA2C?
It will be essentially SA2C, except that at the moment we are not a research center. We are a service that we are part of a service that Supercomputing Wales and Swansea University provide. And for instance, would you find useful to affiliate yourself with SA2C? Will you find it useful if there was this research center that was running and that proper, well, not proper in the sense, but I mean, researchers that also go to conferences and talk about research and not only about software optimizations. At the moment, what we are doing is mostly on the software side.
Yeah. So that's fine.
So should we get more visible and more involved on the research side of things?
I think part of all of these arguments really come down to us sitting in a room somewhere and trying to decide what's the best, what can we do to provide the most value for the HPC community, and this is one of those ideas where as Biagio pointed out, would it be valuable for you to have affiliations with someone with a body who is a little bit more research focused, rather than something that could potentially almost be in professional services, which is something that, we're in the team, we're all from a research background. We've all got PhDs, we've all been involved with research. So how do we make that as useful as it possibly could be?
Chris.
So when a user is signing up to any of these services, we will often get asked, like, how much CPU power do you need, how much RAM do you need, to which the answer is invariably as much as possible. Could you, I don't know who the relevant person is, but could you talk about in this new system how resources are going to get allocated and what different levels of researchers, how much power they're allowed, how much power they're each going to get allocated, and how it's going to get sorted out?
Yeah, I mean, that's a sensitive topic. Not sensitive because we don't want to talk about it, but sensitive because people get quite touchy when we talk about it. Essentially, at the moment, as I was mentioning before, we are supported by Supercomputing Wales, and we need to make sure that we return the deliverables of Supercomputing Wales. Currently, there is no prioritization mechanism, but we are already talking, I don't know now if we are able to implement it or not, we are already talking about some prioritization with all the details that needs to be agreed, but the principle will be that those who contribute more to the project get more guarantees about the resources. Yeah. At the same time, we need to safeguard the principle that we need to host on the system as many people as possible. This is an educational tool. This is a leverage tool that you might need for further grants applications. So maybe at the moment you don't have a grant, but you have an excellent idea that you cannot transform in a grant application if you don't have a machine to test it on. So we need to balance these two different needs. And at the moment, we are working on compromise solutions. Well, the answer to your question, is we ask about resources, and we need to make sure that they are commensurate to the return and to what you want to do. Okay? Most of the times, if we add up all the resource requests that we have had, I think that we will oversubscribe the machine by a factor of 10 already. Okay? So when we say, when we grant an account on the machine, what we are actually saying is that, yes, we have evaluated your project, it looks reasonable to us. No, well, we cannot promise all the resources you are asking for because just there aren't. So we will be queuing with everybody else, and the resources will be allocated on a fair usage basis according to most of the times the automatic principles that have been implemented in the queuing system.
Yeah. I'd say from a sysadmin's point, this thing about oversubscribing the system is my worst nightmare. It will happen, so we haven't finalised the details, but we will be looking at things like having not huge amounts, but 2 or 3 different priorities for users, or different partitions where people, somebody who's given hundreds of thousands of pounds will probably get to run quicker than somebody who's got no grant or whatever. But yeah, we'll get something. We haven't finalised the details yet, but there will definitely be some sort of prioritisation there.
And I think to some extent, regardless of whether you happen to be a person who has 1% of the machine or 80% of the machine, there's still some element of having to plan to allow your workload to fit into some available constrained resource. None of the resources are infinite. And that's another thing that we could potentially help with is, hey, how long is this going to take? How well is it going to scale? How can I effectively use this amount of resource that maybe because there's so much demand on the system is half of what I need? How can I still get the same science out? And we can help you with that as well. So if you have issues with, I don't have enough resource, talk to us anyway. And we've got two options. Either we can make more resource, or we can make better use of the available resource.
And again, just to reiterate what Mark was saying, I mean, there is also another possibility that the code actually is not optimized. So you might think that you need so many resources, while with some expert intervention, you may find out that you need less than that.
Yeah, sure. And also, there are other HPC systems. There are other resources out there. Another thing that we can do, if you have something that's going to scale beyond what we can offer, we can help you put forward applications. We can help you do all sorts of things.
Jonas.
It sort of, like to me listening to this, it sort of feels like it feeds back to more or less the first question we had, which is how Sunbird or Supercomputing Wales in general sort of connects with the larger HPC effort of the UK. Because this system is, well, it's a very small system. And if
I like to call it medium.
okay.
Tall, as they do in the coffee,
All right. But anyway, sort of if everyone sort of comes in and says, I need as much resources as possible, probably hints to the fact that you can't rely on Supercomputing Wales to provide all of the HPC resources you need, and you sort of need, to some extent, HPC Wales to be focused in a way to facilitate people to sort of use Supercomputing Wales as a learning pad and a testing pad, and sort of learning about your problems so that it's easier for you to, request other resources and things like that. Right? Because, for instance, I could easily run the entire cluster at capacity at all times, but I have resources elsewhere, right? You sort of change the focus of what you use this. It's still a very valuable resource, but not necessarily for
production.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sure. As a new user of HPC, like I'm still trying to get to grips with what I guess etiquette is probably the best word to use. Like what is the done thing in terms of I can run it on more hardware and get it done faster, but I completely accept that that's not an appropriate thing to do. And it's, it's whether there's guidelines of
So I mean, just to clarify what Supercomputing Wales is for, I mean, we like to think of it as a production machine. Okay? In fact, it is not. It's a platform for leverage. That's also, I mean, with what we could, with the resources, and with the limits that we had. So the idea is that you use Supercomputing Wales. Well, if it works for you at moderate or small size jobs, that's fine. Otherwise, the correct usage of Supercomputing Wales is to prepare grant applications for getting supercomputing time in facilities that have larger capacity. Yeah. So it was not intended to be a production machine. Well, certainly not for everybody, but it was just not intended to be a production machine. So it's not a way of generating papers as it is. Okay.
Yeah, and just following from the same thing, and at the risk of repeating myself over and over again, this is something that we've helped people with. So writing applications, applying for other HPC resources, we've helped groups in the university with the characterization of their codes to strengthen their applications, so that then they can go on and get these bigger resources.
Yeah,
so, including yourself. Yeah, sure.
So I can't see from here. Has lunch arrived?
It seems to be arriving.
It seems to be in the process of arriving. So we have time for one more question. If there is another question in the room. Critical mistake. In that case, let's thank all three panelists again.
Thank you. Thank you.